Present with his lawyers, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff, and we have Mr. Bailey and Mr. Villius, Mr. Miata, and Mr. Lewin, who is present. Mr. Lewin, you may resume your cross-examination of Mr. Durst.
Mr. Durst, do you remember the testimony of Trooper Jim Harney, who testified for the New York State Police?
I remember some of it.
Trooper Harney testified about the conversation. Oh, sorry. Forgot again. Trooper Harney testified about the conversation that he had with you. I think the date was February 5th, but around that time he had a conversation with you where he discussed, February 5th, 1982, where he discussed with you, brought up the incident at Jacoby. I'm going to play that right now. That's JH024. This is already testimony that is a part of the evidence in this case.
And Your Honor, this is from the conditional exam of Detective James Harney, and it was marked as People's 56.
Yes.
When I asked him about his wife having been treated at Jacoby Hospital emergency room, and when he denied any incident of the knowledge.
Okay. So when you asked him that, how, if at all, did his demeanor change? What did you notice?
I would say it changed somewhat from uneducated to educated.
What do you mean by that?
He just was more concerned. My impression was he was concerned that we knew about this incident, this reported incident.
Mr. Durst, do you remember that testimony now?
I do.
So, do you disagree with the fact that when you spoke to Detective Harney, that you denied any knowledge of the incident that sent your wife to Jacoby Hospital on January 6th?
I must have lied to Detective Harney.
Well, Mr. Durst, what would be your motivation not to have told Detective Harney, hey, listen, I know about that situation. Kathy made it up. She caused the injury to herself. Why wouldn't you have told him that?
I wanted him to make Kathy, I wanted him to look for Kathy.
Mr. Durst, how would you telling Detective Harney that Kathy had faked an injury affect whether or not he looked for Kathy?
If he thought that what Kathy was doing was Kathy doing it to herself, he would not have listed Kathy as a missing person.
And you're getting that assessment from what? Where does that come from?
I don't understand the question.
So your assessment that if you had told Detective Harney that Kathy had caused the own injury to herself, that he would not enter her in some missing persons database or work on the case, where's that coming from? Where are you getting that knowledge from?
I think that's obvious. If he thought Kathy was playing games, he would not take Kathy's disappearance seriously.
So this was an attempt by you to kind of gallantly assist the detectives in keeping their motivation to try to find Kathy.
Yeah,
You were asked about this by Andrew Jarecki on December 12, 2010, correct?
not that I recall.
Do you think, Mr. Durst, that you told him the story that you just said in court about Kathy injuring herself?
I don't remember.
RD 063, December 12, 2010, page 431, line 16 to page 432, line 5.
And Your Honor, this was from People's 269.
Thank you.
Did you ever create any marks on her face, or did you create
No,
that?
I never saw any marks on her face, and I wouldn't hit her in the face.
Did you, if you were gonna have a physical altercation with her, what would typically happen? Would you-
Pushing and shoving and get out of here, or whatever it was, that would be the physical altercation, and falling down now and then, but I never hit her in the face, I never saw anything on her face, and neither did anybody else ever see anything on her face.
You never mentioned that story to Mr. Jarecki, did you?
About Detective Harney or about Kathy?
You never mentioned the story that you just told in court about Kathy causing the injury to herself to Andrew Jarecki, did you?
I don't know.
Well, Mr. Durst, are you aware, since you have all the discovery in this case, are you aware of any statement you've ever made to anybody in this case prior to testifying today to this story of Kathy causing her own injury? Have you ever told anybody that before who's a member of law enforcement or who's a member of the media?
I'm sure I told Nick Scapetta, and I'm sure I told my defense lawyers. And I think I told Ed Wright.
So what you've named are lawyers who have privilege and an investigator who works for your lawyers, the lawyer and the investigator who are now dead. Correct?
I am not sure that I did not tell Andrew about it.
So I want you to assume for a moment, Mr. Durst, that in all the hours of video, there is no mention by you of this story. I want you to assume that for a moment. Can you explain why you would not have told Andrew what actually happened?
I guess it did not come up.
Well, Mr. Durst, I just played you a clip where you were talking to Andrew Jarecki about that particular injury. He specifically asked you about it. So what do you mean it didn't come up?
Play it again. I don't think he asked me about it.
So, Mr. Durst, your position is that in this clip, he didn't specifically reference the January 6th incident. In this clip, that's correct. What I'll do, if you're saying you want to see where he asked you about it, I'll get the clip and we'll come back to it. You agree that at the time this happened, January 6th, you and Kathy were married, correct?
Correct.
And you were her next of kin, correct?
I was her husband.
You were present in court when your attorney, in cross-examining Dr. Bach, the treating physician, referred to Kathy's eye injury as, quote, minor domestic violence, unquote. Is that your belief that if that was domestic violence, that it would have been minor?
If that was domestic violence, would it be minor? It was not domestic violence.
You agree?
And I never saw anything on her cheek. All I saw was her rubbing it.
You agree, Mr. Durst, your attorney asked Dr. Bach, he referred to Kathy's eye injury as minor domestic violence. I'm asking you, if in fact that was domestic violence, would you consider that to be minor?
I never saw any. If that was, it was not domestic violence.
Mr. Durst, do you believe that there's any type of physical violence that can be perpetrated by an intimate partner that can be characterized as, quote, minor?
I would never say that any kind of domestic violence is minor or major.
By the way, you previously said before the break that you've never hit your wife in the body. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you notice in the last clip I played you, RD063? When you were describing what happened and how you didn't hit her in the face, Mr. Durst, do you recall doing something like this? You coiled up your fists and you went forward like you were working the body in a boxing match. Do you recall doing that?
No.
Please replay it again, RD063. Please watch, Mr. Durst.
Did you ever create any marks on her face, or did you create
No,
that?
I never saw any marks on her face, and I wouldn't hit her in the face.
Did you, if you were going to have a physical altercation with her, what would typically happen? Would you-
Pushing and shoving and get out of here, or whatever it was, that would be the physical altercation. Falling down now and then, but I never hit her in the face, I never saw anything on her face, and neither did anybody else ever see anything on her face.
What did you mean when you were demonstrating? You agree it looks like you're punching working the body, right? Is that fair?
I have no idea what I was demonstrating.
Well, please try to describe it. You agree, is that what it looks like?
I don't know what it looked like.
We put your hands in a fist. Do you agree?
I agree I had my hands in fists.
And do you agree that you then punch forward with both hands as if you were punching in the midsection, working a body in a boxing fight? Agree?
No, I don't agree to that.
By the way, Mr. Durst, you didn't say you didn't hit your wife. You said you didn't hit her in the face. Why did you respond that way? Why did you say I never hit my wife in the face?
I think I was answering a question.
You think you were answering a question. Mr. Durst, your statement was, you're asked, did you ever create any marks on her face, or did you? And you said, I never saw any marks on her face. And then you said, and I wouldn't hit her in the face. Why didn't you respond, I wouldn't hit my wife? You've just testified, I never hit my wife in the face, I never hit my wife in the body. So why wouldn't you respond, I wouldn't hit my wife?
I said what I said. I would hit my wife in the face, and I wouldn't hit my wife in the body. I wouldn't hit my wife.
All right, let's move on to a new area. At the time of Kathy's disappearance, you were primarily living on Riverside Drive, is that correct?
Correct.
And your testimony in direct was at the time of the disappearance that Kathy was also living on Riverside Drive and not at East 86th Street, is that correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that Kathy was actually primarily living at East 86th Street because it was much closer to the medical school and the hospitals where she was doing her rotations?
Well, both your comment and your question are wrong. She was not living at 86th Street, and 12 East 86th Street is barely closer to Albert Einstein than 37 Riverside Drive.
So, Mr. Durst, you heard Karen Minatello's testimony, the manager of the East 86th Street apartment, whose conditional examination was admitted at this trial, correct?
The question is, did I hear Karen Minatello? And the answer is, I heard Karen Minatello.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the version of events that she testified to regarding where Kathy was living is different than the testimony you've given in this case?
I never met Karen Minatello in the 3 years that I lived at 12 East 86th Street, and I do not believe that Kathy ever met Karen Minatello. Karen Minatello testified that she found Kathy's clothes in the basement, and she blamed me for putting them there. Karen Minatello also testified that I had been stealing bicycles from the storage room. Obviously, Karen Minatello is not aware that people with hydrocephalus don't ride bicycles.
Did you remember Karen Minatello also testified that the week before your wife disappeared, she was trying, Mr. Durst, to rent a smaller unit in the building on East 86th Street and to sublet her own apartment? Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Do you know of any reason or motivation why Ms. Minatello would come in and testify the way that she did? You aware of any motivation she has to come in and testify as she did?
No,
Do you agree that your wife, in the week before she disappeared, was looking to get away from you?
no,
All right. Who is Prudence Farrow?
she was a woman I had an affair with.
And when did you have an affair with her?
It started before Kathy disappeared and lasted for a few months after Kathy disappeared.
Mr. Durst, it started well before Kathy disappeared, correct?
No, not correct.
When did it start?
It was after we moved to 37 Riverside Drive. So the earliest it could have been would have been October of '81. I don't think it started until closer to Thanksgiving.
Mr. Durst, you would agree that she was different than other women you had had affairs with during your marriage, correct?
She was Prudence Farrow, and the two other women who I had an affair with were different.
What I'm asking, Mr. Durst, is that you felt much strongly about, more strongly about Prudence Farrow than you did about the other women that you had cheated with, correct?
That's what I told Jarecki. That was not true.
Well, you didn't just tell Jarecki that, correct? You told me and detectives that during the March 15, 2015 interview, correct?
During the March 15, 2015 interview, I was attempting to do a plea bargain with you.
Okay. RD 333, 31515, page 54, lines 4 through 15.
And Your Honor, this is from People's 291.
Okay.
I think that one of your affairs was different than the others. Do you know which one I think was different?
Prudence Farrow is what everybody looks towards.
Is that accurate or no?
No, I was closer to Prudence than I was to anybody else that I slept with. I mean, Prudence and I spent time together. My other affairs were 1-2 nights, and in the end. And Kathy knew and hated the fact that I was seeing Prudence Farrow.
So, Mr. Durst, you discussed it with me during that interview, is that correct? That refresh your memory of discussing it?
Correct.
Now, you just mentioned that you did it because of plea bargaining, but haven't you said, Mr. Durst, that you didn't bring up plea bargaining until probably, 10 minutes left in a 3-hour interview? Is that right?
I did not think I needed to specifically say, sir, I'm looking to do a plea bargain with you.
So, would the answer to my question be, let's take it in steps. Did I ever mention anything about a plea or bargaining during our interview?
Yes,
Really, what did I say about plea bargaining, Mr. Durst?
you said that if, I'm very much paraphrasing now, but that if we work something out, all I can do is make a recommendation.
So, did that statement that I made, did that come after you brought up the idea, withdraw? Mr. Durst, in the middle of our conversation, did you suddenly bring up the idea of, in essence, if I tell you what you want to know, Mr. Lewin, what can you do for me? Is that how the subject came up, of what you call plea bargaining?
Yes,
And Mr. Durst, you would agree that conversation did not come up until, at the earliest, maybe 20 minutes left of a 3-hour interview? Is that correct?
well, I will accept that if that is what you're telling me. But I thought you were enough of a professional to know that I was looking for a plea bargain.
So your position was that when I was interviewing you with detectives on an uncharged case, without a lawyer present, that I would have known that you were looking to plea bargain a case you'd not been charged with and were not admitting to yet. Is that your testimony?
I think we need a second.
Overruled, but constrain your question. That question is all right. Give me the answer.
Well, I would like to correct part of your
I want to
comment.
make a speaking objection.
Okay, you can state your grounds.
He's making himself a witness, Mr. Lewin.
Okay, overruled.
This question of whether or not I had been charged went right back to when I was first, in my opinion, arrested. I said I was arrested. The FBI agent said, no, he wasn't arrested. I said they handcuffed me to a table. The FBI agent said, yeah, we did handcuff him to a table, but he wasn't under arrest. And now you bring up that I had not been charged. This is legal schmeagle. I was put in handcuffs, taken to jail, and put in a cell naked. Whether I'd been technically charged or not, the fact that that could be done to me was enough for me to want to plea bargain.
So the answer to my question then I assume would be, Mr. Durst, let me ask you, are you aware that you did not answer my question in that answer you gave, or no?
I am answering your question, you just don't like the way I'm answering it.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time.
But I would leave out the things that he's grasping. I mean, Mr. Durst is focusing on the uncharged part. Will you remove that variable
Okay.
from your question and make it,
All right,
make
sure.
it clearer?
Sure, Your Honor. Mr. Durst. When you came in there, you were advised of your Miranda rights, correct? For the interview.
Correct.
You were told that whether you wanted to speak to us was completely up to you, correct?
Correct.
You were told that we wanted to talk to you to get information, correct?
I don't remember that.
Do you recall, Mr. Durst, me explaining to you that I was here, I wanted to interview, and I wanted to hear what you had to say? Do you recall, and that's paraphrasing, that that was the tenor of that interview?
Correct.
Would you agree that any statement about plea bargaining, as you refer to it, or if I give you what I want, what can you do for me, did not come up until near the end of the interview? Is that correct?
As far as I am concerned, it came up when you first introduced yourself as the lead attorney from Los Angeles. I assumed that you were knowledgeable and knew what you were doing, and that you were there to do a plea bargain.
So, Mr. Durst, this is not your first rodeo with being charged with murder, correct?
I don't know about this rodeo thing, but yes, I've been charged with murder in the past, specifically the murder of Morris Black.
So, Mr. Durst, are you saying that with your knowledge of legal proceedings from all the situations you've been involved with, that you honestly thought that I showed up there to take a plea bargain on a case where you didn't have a lawyer present? Is that your testimony?
Yes.
All right, let's go back to Prudence Farrow. You were in love with Prudence, correct?
No.
I'm just going to read this one. 315:15, page 57, lines 22 through 24. Question: and at what point in time, two, is it fair to say that you had fallen, and at that point in time, two, is it fair to say that you had fallen in love with Prudence? Answer: yes.
Who am I talking to?
You're talking to myself and two detectives on March 15, 2015.
So I don't know why I said that. I never felt I was in love with Prudence.
You're not disputing that you said it, though, correct?
No, I'm not disputing that I said it.
Can you explain why you possibly would have answered the question that way, that you were in love with her if you weren't?
That's what I felt like saying.
You actually got her an apartment to live in at a very reduced rate, correct, Prudence Farrow?
I arranged. She was living with her mother, with her two children, on Central Park West. I arranged for the leasing agent for our apartments to show Prudence the apartments we had and to rent her anything she wanted.
At a reduced rate, correct, Mr. Durst?
I don't think it was at a reduced rate.
You stated during the 3/15/15 interview that Prudence told you right before Kathy disappeared that she would not continue the relationship with you because you were married, correct?
I don't recall saying that.
Do you recall 3/15/15, page 57, line 25? Durst. And Prudence has said that very near the time of, this is myself asking the question. And Prudence has said that very near the time of Kathy's death that she had told you that because you were married that that was a problem for her. Do you remember that? You responded, yeah, we had that discussion. Does that refresh your memory?
I might have said that. First of all, it refers to Kathy's death, and I've never referred to Kathy as being dead. Second of all, Prudence was married, so there was never a question of us getting married.
Mr. Durst, isn't it true that Prudence Farrow said to you she would not continue the relationship with you as long as you were still with your wife, correct?
No.
So how did Kathy know about Prudence?
Yes.
And did Kathy know that Prudence was someone that you cared about?
Kathy knew that I was seeing Prudence.
By seeing Prudence, meaning you were sleeping with her, correct?
Correct.
And what did Kathy say to you about that?
She did not like it.
In fact, didn't you have, at one point, Mr. Durst, didn't you arrange for Prudence to speak with Kathy to try and influence Kathy to divorce you?
No.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that you wanted to pursue a relationship with Prudence, but that Kathy Durst, your wife, was in the way?
No.
Did you want to pursue a relationship with Prudence?
Depends when you're talking about.
Okay, when did you, before Kathy disappeared, did you want to pursue a relationship with Prudence?
Yes.
When did you want to pursue a relationship with Prudence? When would that have been?
December 1981.
And was Kathy okay with you pursuing a relationship with Prudence?
No.
And was Prudence okay with you pursuing a relationship with her if you were still with Kathy?
Prudence didn't care. Prudence was married.
So, Mr.
Prudence wanted to go back with her husband, the father of her children.
So I'm not asking what Prudence wanted in terms of you wanted to pursue a relationship with Prudence by your own statement. Kathy did not want you to pursue a relationship with Prudence. And I'm asking you, how did that get resolved?
Kathy disappeared.
Yes, that is how it got resolved, isn't it?
I'm sorry? It's a leading question. It's appropriate. Overruled.
That is how it got resolved, Mr. Durst, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, I just want to clarify, it's your position that Kathy and Prudence never spoke?
To the best of my knowledge, they never spoke.
By the way, if they had spoke, would you tell us?
If they had spoken, one of them would have had to tell me about it. And yes, I would tell you what I had been told.
Okay, so that's a hypothetical you're willing to answer.
That certainly is hypothetical.
But that's one you're willing to answer, though, right?
Yes.
You kind of forgot your rule for a second of, I won't answer hypotheticals, right?
I got carried away.
Okay, at one point, in January of '82, right before Kathy's disappearance, did you go to dinner with Prudence Farrow?
I saw Prudence Farrow in the month of January 1982.
And that was, at that point, the two of you were no longer dating, correct?
No, it's not correct.
Mr. You took a long time to answer that question. Let me finish.
Trying to be accurate.
Were you trying to be accurate, Mr. Durst, or were you running things through your mind to try and figure out what is an answer that you could get away with that I could not impeach?
What's going through my mind is trying to figure out what happened 39 years ago.
So, is it your position that you were still dating Prudence at the time you had that dinner?
I don't know what dinner we were talking about.
You just didn't, you said you saw her in January of 1982. Wasn't that a dinner?
I saw her in January of 1982.
How did you see her? What were the circumstances?
I don't remember, but I know that we were dating. We were dating before Kathy disappeared, and we were dating after Kathy disappeared.
Did you have sex with her the last time you saw her? In January of 82?
I don't remember.
At that point then, when you saw her, is it your position that the two of you, you and Prudence, were having a relationship?
Prudence and I were having a relationship, and we were sleeping together.
Mr. Durst, you're aware that Prudence Farrow was interviewed in this case, correct?
I am not aware of that.
So you've not listened to her interview or read any transcript of her interview?
No, I would like to get a transfer. This is for my lawyers. I'd like to get a transcript of it.
So it's your position that even as you sit here right now, you have no idea what Prudence Farrow has said in this case?
Correct.
If Prudence Farrow, Mr. Durst, if Prudence Farrow had said in an interview that at the time, Your Honor, we can approach and I can explain the proper impeachment.
I'm sorry?
We can approach and I can explain the proper impeachment.
All right. Take a short break. You may stand and stretch. Don't talk about the case.
Deep breaths.
Yeah, of course. The out breath in particular.
All right, Your Honor, I'll come back to the issue that we've been discussing. I'll come back to that. The week before Kathy's disappearance, was she working at the hospital or doing a rotation between January 24th and January 31st, 1982?
I don't know.
So it's your position, Mr. Durst, that you're living with her at Riverside Drive. This is the last week of her life, and it's your testimony now that you have no idea whether she was working, in rotations, or off that week. You don't know?
I don't know what she was doing that week.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the medical records, the records from the hospital, which have been stipulated, admitted into evidence, demonstrate, and the testimony in this case, that Kathy was off. She was not working in the hospital doing rotations between January 24th and January 31st, 1982. Would you agree? That's what the evidence is shown in this case.
Well, I have no idea. Whatever the evidence is, the evidence is. I don't recall whether she was working a week before she disappeared.
Well, you're aware that she finished the radiology rotation on January 24th of 1982, correct?
I'm aware now because you're telling me, but I am not aware.
And you're aware that she was supposed to start, now you're aware she was supposed to start acute pediatrics on February 1st, correct?
I knew that February 1st was a new rotation.
But you didn't know what it was, correct?
I did not know what it was.
But now, not asking what you knew then, now you've heard all the testimony in trial, you heard Dr. Sophie Bach testify, you're aware that Kathy was due to start a pediatric clinic at 9 a.m. on February 1st, 1982. Is that correct?
I'm aware of that now.
On January 31st, 1982, Kathy went to dinner at Gilberta's house in Connecticut, correct?
Correct.
And I just want to make clear, that was a dinner, not a party, based on your understanding, correct?
I was not there.
Well, Mr. Durst, during your testimony, you described it, you said, this is from August 11, 2021. I'm not going to play it, I want to go a little faster here. You said Kathy wanted to go to Gilberta's house for dinner. Do you recall saying that?
I don't recall saying that Kathy wanted to go to Gilberta's house early in the afternoon.
No, what I asked you is that Kathy, you know what, I'm trying to save time, it doesn't work. RD 718, 81121.
And Your Honor, this would be a new exhibit. It would be people's 305 and 305 a day.
Yes.
Kathy wanted to go to Gilberta's house for dinner.
Did you want to go?
No, and I didn't go.
Why did you not want to go to Gilberta's house?
I don't like, by then I absolutely did not like Gilberta. Did not like Gilberta's influence over Kathy, and just plain did not like Gilberta.
Was there any kind of argument or fight over that?
No,
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that you didn't mention anything about a party, correct?
Gilberta's house was always a party.
Have you heard the testimony from Fadwa Najami that Fadwa's strict Lebanese parents were at the house that night for dinner? Did you hear that testimony?
I don't recall that, no. I remember Gilberta's sister testifying, but I don't remember her saying who was at Gilberta's house that day.
I want you to assume for a moment, Mr. Durst, that that Fadwa Najami testified when she was asked by your attorneys, I don't remember which one, whether there was a party and cocaine and drug use involved, that Fadwa responded, "This was dinner with my parents. My dad is an extremely traditional person. There were no drugs at the house when my father was there." Does that refresh your memory, Mr. Durst, of the testimony?
I don't recall that, no.
Are you disputing, when I bring it up, when you're saying you don't recall it, is it that you don't remember, or are you saying that's not what the testimony was?
I don't know what her testimony was. I do know that any time Kathy went to Gilberta's house, they did cocaine together.
So, Mr. Durst, I want you to assume that Fadwa Najami testified as I indicated. I want you to assume that. Do you know of a reason why Fadwa Najami would have a motivation to make up the statement that there were no drugs at the house?
Maybe she did not want to talk about doing drugs.
Were you aware that Fadwa Najami testified that she had had drug issues in the past and was a drug counselor? Do you remember that testimony?
I am aware that Gilberta Najami did 2 prison terms for selling cocaine to middle school students. What her sister talks about,
But
I don't think changed anything.
motion to strike, Your Honor, is non-responsive. So, Mr. Durst, what you just did, Mr. Durst, you agree that what you just did was, rather than answer my question about Fadwa Najami, you literally decided you were going to try to say things about Gilberta Najami which you knew you were not allowed to say, correct?
Object to formal question.
Overruled.
I do and did not know I was not supposed to announce that Gilberta Najami did 2 prison terms for selling cocaine to middle school students.
And when you just repeated it a second time, that was an accident as well?
That was not an accident.
You're just going to do whatever you want up there, no matter what the rules are, aren't you?
No.
Back to the argument.
Sustained, stricken.
Mr. Durst, do you understand that you don't make the rules here? You understand that, right?
Objection, argument.
Sustained. Stricken.
If I made the rules, I wouldn't be here.
Clearly.
Yeah, stricken.
So, Mr. Durst, I'm going to ask you the question that I asked you a moment ago. I'm going to preface it by saying it has nothing to do with Gilberta Najami. Do you understand that? Do you understand? I'm going to ask you a question that does not relate or mention Gilberta Najami. Do you understand what I'm saying right now?
You're going to ask me a question that is not related to Gilberta Najami.
It's going to be related to Fadwa Najami. Do you understand that?
I understand that.
Do you understand, Mr. Durst, that if you answer the question that Gilberta Najami sold cocaine to middle school students and puppies in the response, that would not be responsive? Do you understand that?
I understand that.
Okay, let me ask the question then. So, are you aware, Mr. Durst, that Fadwa Najami, during her testimony, spoke of prior drug use that she had had?
Fatma Najami said something about cocaine. What exactly she said, I don't remember.
Mr. Durst, a moment ago you said that you thought that the reason Fadwa Najami might have had a motivation to not be truthful was because she didn't want to disclose information about using cocaine. So my question to you is, you would agree that Fadwa Najami freely testified about her prior drug use, correct?
Really testified about her prior drug use. She testified about cocaine. I don't know specifically what she said.
Do you recall her testifying, Mr. Durst, that she had used cocaine in the past? Don't remember if it was under direct or cross, but that she freely admitted that and discussed it during her testimony. Would you agree?
I remember her testifying about her cocaine use. What exactly she said about it, I don't remember.
So I'm going to go back to the question I asked you, which was, are you aware of any reason why Fadwa Najami would have gotten on the stand and made up the information that there was no drug use that night at the family dinner?
Calls back to life.
People versus Chapman, Your Honor, does the court want to cite?
No, it's a question about speculation, just a moment. Let's see. Pardon me. The reason for why I would have gotten on the stand and made up information. There's no drug use. Okay, overall.
Can answer, Mr. Durst.
I am not aware of any reason Fatma Najami would testify about drugs.
The question was, were you aware of any information, Mr. Durst, why Fadwa Najami would misrepresent the activities that were going on at dinner at her parents' house? Or at Gilberta's when her parents were there, excuse me.
Maybe they snorted the cocaine when her parents weren't looking.
So the question would be, if she's admitting that she is using and has used cocaine, why, Mr. Durst, would she not acknowledge that they were using cocaine that night? Are you aware of a reason or a motivation that she has that would influence her testimony?
I have no idea what Fatma Najami's motivation for anything she says or does.
And then I would assume by that response then the answer to the question would be, you know of no motivation why Fadwa Najami would have testified that way if it were not true. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's talk about the situation. You said that you didn't go because you did not like Gilberta, correct?
And because I did not want to go for a 45-minute drive each way on a rainy day, and because I did not want to go to a cocaine party.
Where have you mentioned, Mr. Durst, that the reason that you did not go to Gilberta's was because there was a, quote, cocaine party? Where have you said that before?
Whenever I was asked.
Well, you were asked by, okay. Mr. Durst, we just played clip 718.
Your Honor, the record should reflect that Mr. Lewin is laughing.
He is chuckling.
Okay, go ahead, play your,
Mr. Durst, I don't want to play it again. I'm going to just read it because it's easier. I just played clip 718. You say that Kathy wanted to go to Gilberta's house for dinner. Mr. DeGuerin asked you, did you want to go? You answer, no, I didn't go. Why did you not want to go to Gilberta's house? Answer, I don't like, by then I absolutely did not like Gilberta, did not like Gilberta's influence over Kathy, and plain did not like Gilberta. Was there any kind of fight over that? Answer, no. Your lawyer just asked you on August 11th that very question. Did your answer involve, I didn't want to go because it was a cocaine party?
Well, there were myriad reasons I did not want to go. I threw out a couple of them.
All right. You don't dispute that while Kathy was at Gilberta's house, you called her, correct? You agree that happened?
I called her.
And you were upset with her when you called, correct?
No,
So you do not agree that you and your wife argued on the phone?
we did not argue on the phone.
You're aware of the testimony that Kathy was upset and that Fadwa heard her version of the phone call and it sounded like it was not a pleasant call. You're aware of that, correct?
True.
Yeah, I don't remember Fatma Najami saying anything about the phone call.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that your wife was upset with you because she had just found out from Peter Schwartz that you had settled the case with him? Isn't that a true statement, Mr. Durst?
I am aware that while Kathy was at Gilberta's house, she telephoned Peter Schwartz.
And are you aware that Peter Schwartz told her, the testimony is that he told her that he had settled the case and that she became upset about it? You're aware that Peter Schwartz testified Kathy was upset when he told her that, correct?
Peter Schwartz testified. I don't remember what he testified, but what happened was his lawyer quit.
It's not what I asked you, Mr. Durst. What I'm asking you is, Peter Schwartz testified that he had a conversation with Kathy on January 31st and took notes of that conversation. And he testified that Kathy was upset with him because he informed her that he had settled his lawsuit with you. You remember that testimony, correct?
Well, if Kathy was upset, she was upset with Peter Schwartz. She did not tell me she was upset with Peter Schwartz.
So you did not have any argument or disagreement over the phone about Peter Schwartz and the settlement with Kathy?
I had no conversation with Kathy about Peter Schwartz, and I did not know that she had telephoned Peter Schwartz for weeks after that.
How did you find out that she had contacted Peter Schwartz weeks after that?
I think Mike Strook told me.
Who did?
Detective Strook.
Okay. Your Honor, this is a good time if it works for the court.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're returning at 1:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not affirm or express any opinion on the case.
Your Honor, can I put something very briefly? It's
Yes.
about 30 seconds.
Jurors and alternates have left. Yes, Mr. Lewin?
You know, there was an objection by the defense regarding the line of questioning that I'm asking. I will ask Mr. Durst a question of, is he aware of a motivation why a witness would have a reason to lie or be untruthful? That is People versus Chatman, Chatman, 2006, 38 Cal 4th at 344, at 381 to 383.
Thank you. I'll look at that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else? Then we'll break for
No, thanks, Your Honor.
It's 1:30. Oh, question off the record.